She was sold for $4 on a morning,
This debt
so
will be
cold it
settled.
felt like the sky itself
But we need to
had
talk
turned
terms.
its back on her, the coins clinking in her stepfather's palm, sounding louder than her own heartbeat, louder than the promise her mother once whispered that no man would ever own her. And as the horse-drawn wagon rolled away from the shack she had called home, she realized promises were luxuries meant for people who were not drowning in debt, because hunger had a way of rewriting morality, and poverty had no mercy for daughters, especially daughters who were young, quiet, and already invisible. Her name was Eliza, though no one bothered to say it as the deal was made. Just a nod, a spit in the dirt, and a cowboy standing across from her stepfather, tall, broad-shouldered, dust-covered, with eyes that looked like they had seen too many winters handed over for silver, dollars without bargaining, without a smile, without even looking at her. And that somehow hurt more than the sale itself, because it confirmed what she feared most, that she was not a person in this exchange, but a solution to a problem, a living receipt to settle a debt she never owed. And as she climbed into the wagon beside him, her hands shaking beneath her thin shawl, she expected cruelty, because cruelty was all she had ever known from men who believed ownership came with permission to break spirits. Yet the cowboy said nothing, did nothing, simply clicked his tongue to the horse and drove forward, the silence between them stretching like a canyon, heavy and terrifying, broken only by the creak of wood and the wind slicing through her dress. And it was in that silence that fear truly bloomed, because she had no idea what kind of man buys a wife for $4, no idea what kind of life waited at the end of that road, only the certainty that whatever freedom she had once imagined was now buried beneath the weight of survival. And if you're listening to this story and already feel your chest tightening, take a moment to subscribe, because stories like Eliza's are not just meant to be heard once, they're meant to stay with you, to remind you why resilience matters, why hope survives even in the harshest soil. The journey to the ranch felt endless, miles of open land rolling by like a reminder of everything she could see, but never touch. And when they finally arrived, the place was not what she expected. No grand house, no signs of wealth, just a modest cabin, sturdy but worn, surrounded by open pasture and a sky so wide it almost felt mocking. And when the cowboy finally spoke, his voice was low and careful, as if each word had to be earned. "You'll have your own room," he said, not unkindly, not softly either, just matter of fact, and that alone confused her more than cruelty would have. Because kindness, even neutral kindness, was dangerous when you didn't understand its price. And that night, as she sat alone on the edge of a narrow bed, listening to the wind brush against the walls, she waited for the knock that never came, waited for the moment when the reality of being sold would turn physical. But instead there was only silence, then the sound of a door closing somewhere else in the cabin. And hours later, morning light crept in through the window, untouched, unclaimed. And for the first time since the wagon left her childhood behind, she slept without crying, though fear still lived in her bones. Because freedom, she would learn, does not always arrive as escape. Sometimes it arrives as confusion, as space where none should exist. And over the following days, she watched him from a distance. This man called Caleb, the cowboy who rose before dawn, worked until his hands bled, spoke rarely, and never once reminded her of what she was supposed to be. There were no demands, no threats, only rules meant for safety, and that made her uneasy, because what kind of jailer leaves the door unlocked? And as weeks passed, she began to notice the way he avoided touching her, the way he ate last, the way he slept lightly as if guarding something precious. And it slowly dawned on her that perhaps she had misunderstood the transaction, that perhaps the $4 had not been paid to own her body, but to save her from something worse. Yet suspicion clung tightly, because hope had betrayed her before, and still, tiny changes began to carve cracks in her fear. Her own work, gloves left neatly on the table, a blanket placed quietly over her shoulders while she read by candlelight, a horse saddled and waiting with no explanation, other than "you should know how to ride if you want to leave someday." And that word "leave" rang louder than any vow, because no man who believes he owns a wife prepares her to walk away. And as Eliza stood beneath the open sky one evening, the sun bleeding gold into the horizon, she realized something dangerous was happening inside her. She was beginning to believe that this forced marriage might not be a cage, that the cowboy who bought her for $4 might be paying a debt of his own, one written in guilt, loss, and a promise to never become the kind of man he despised. And if this story has pulled you in so far, if you want to know how fear turns into strength and how a woman sold as property finds her way back to herself, make sure you subscribe now, because Chapter 2 will take you deeper into the truth behind Caleb's choice, the threats that rise from the past, and the moment Eliza must decide whether freedom means running away or standing her ground. The day Eliza finally understood the truth about the $4 was the day the past came riding back into the valley with guns on its hips and hatred in its eyes, because freedom, she learned, is never given quietly. It is always challenged, tested, demanded back by the world that profits from chains. And it began with dust on the horizon and the sound of hooves that did not belong. Caleb stiffening beside her like a man who had been waiting his entire life for a reckoning he prayed would never come, his jaw tightening as he told her to go inside, to lock the door, to remember where the rifle was. And the fear that surged through her was different from the fear she had known before, sharper, more protective, because for the first time she was not afraid for herself alone but for the man who had bought her and never claimed her. And as the riders approached, 3 men, hard-faced, smelling of whiskey and entitlement, Eliza saw in their eyes the same hunger she had fled, the same belief that a woman sold once could be sold again. Louder, rougher, demanding to know where the girl was, laughing about debts and ownership and how a bargain made could not be undone by a cowboy playing savior. And it was then that Caleb spoke words he had never spoken before, words that cracked open the silence he lived inside, telling them she was free, that the money had been paid to end the debt, not transfer it, that no man owned her. And when they laughed and reached for their guns, Eliza understood that the quiet kindness she had been given was not weakness but restraint, forged by pain she had never asked about. And the shots rang out like thunder, echoing across the open land, shattering the illusion that peace comes without a price. And when it was over, when the riders lay broken and fleeing, and the dust settled again, Caleb sank to his knees as if the weight of years had finally found him, confessing in a voice stripped bare that his own sister had been sold once, sold to clear a debt their father left behind, that he had been too young, too poor, too late to stop it, and that $4 was all it had taken to save Eliza from the same fate. $4 he would have paid 1,000 times over if it meant changing even one ending. And Eliza listened, heartbreaking and healing all at once, realizing that the forced marriage had never been about control, but about protection in a world that respected only ownership papers and rings. And in that moment she made a choice, not because she owed him, not because she was bought, but because she was finally free to choose. And she stayed, not as a possession but as a partner, standing beside him as they rebuilt trust brick by brick, word by word, until the valley no longer whispered fear but possibility, until she learned to read contracts, handle money, ride faster than the wind, until the girl sold for $4 became a woman who could never be priced again. And when she eventually stood before others like her women told they were burdens, debts, currency, she told them her story, not as a tragedy but as proof that freedom can grow in the most unlikely soil when someone dares to plant it.